Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Wow, I'm kind of like a blind date. The anticipation is better than the actual event, but thank you very much. This was great tonight. I mean, we've got the Ferranti and Teicher here of Lancaster, for those of you old enough to remember them. Great pleasure to be here. I've been to Lancaster many times. As you can tell, I know how to pronounce the name of the town, so I said it right. Yeah. Not all people from Washington, D.C. are idiots, but, you know, we got a lot of them down there. Unfortunately, I have to go back tonight because of the snow. Normally, I would just say that we always have snow jobs in Washington, thanks to Congress, but it's a great pleasure to be with you here tonight and to see such a great turnout. I learned some stuff from the financial advisors. You've got some really, really good people here. Well, now, the year was 1979. The aging cleric rose slowly from his seat to the podium before 3,000 people at the National Prayer Breakfast in Washington. And his first words were, "Fellow sinners." And he turned to the President of the United States and said, "And that includes you, Mr. President." And Jimmy Carter smiled knowingly. And then the late Bishop Fulton J. Sheen asked a profound question. How do you define a football field? And he answered, by its boundaries. He went on to tell the story of a group of do-gooders who thought they could improve public education and traveled around the country. This was in the 70s, the days of the Montessori schools and the me decade and getting in touch with your inner self and all those other crazy ideas. And matter of fact, I think that one of the best-selling books had something to do with self. And all these magazines were born. Us magazines, Self, People, all self-directed. So these people went around the country and they looked at the government schools and they decided they needed to knock down the walls. And instead of having children sitting at desks facing a teacher and a blackboard, they would have them sit on the floor and cross their legs and tear down the boundaries and the walls. And a few weeks later, they came back to one of these schools and they saw a high fence around the playground. And they decided that that fence was keeping the children's spirits from soaring. And so they ordered the fence to be removed. A month or so later, they came back to examine the children's behavior, elementary school children, and they found that they were all groped and grouped in the middle of the playground. And someone concluded that when the fence was up, when the boundaries were there, the children felt safe. But when they were removed, they felt less safe. This was a metaphor, I think, for what is in our country right now. We have floods because rivers overflow their boundaries and banks. We have the mess that we have in Washington today because our political leadership has exceeded the boundaries of our Constitution. Now, our founders understood human nature as well as the preachers of their day. They knew that men and women had to be controlled by something, either from within by the presence and power of God, or from without by the secular state under God, creating certain laws that would restrain sinful men and women from seeking their lowest nature. And we've exceeded all of those today. This is why we have a $17 trillion debt and counting. Now, a couple of weeks ago, we had something we call Thanksgiving, although in our increasingly secular culture, we're not told or allowed to really say who we thank. The Unitarians, I think, have probably the best approach to this from a pretty much secular governmental view. Do you know how they pray? They pray to whom it may concern. I think that is... I think that is more in keeping with the ACLU, the Anti-Christians Liberties Union. But anyway, I wrote this column a couple of weeks ago. Somebody at lunch said they had read it, so that was kind of nice. But I think this speaks to where we are today and how we have exceeded our boundaries and are paying a price for it. Economic boundaries, moral and spiritual boundaries, political boundaries. Here's what I wrote about Black Friday. the day after Thanksgiving that the merchants tried to make their profit big enough so that they have a bottom line that is black instead of red. You get it, right? I started with a quote from that well-known theologian John Lennon. Once in a while, they're pretty profound, those Beatles. If everyone demanded peace instead of another television set, there'd be peace. Not bad. Black Friday was a metaphor beyond the merchant's bottom line. Headlines on last Friday's Drudge Report reflect a culture that is being trampled by the greed and me-only attitude of a growing number among us. Here's some of them. Mall mayhem. Suspected shoplifter shot after dragging cop through Kohl's parking lot. For you men, Kohl's is a store, women's fashion. Brawls. Man stabbed over parking spot. Shopper kicked out of Walmart for filming fight. Man shot walking home with a big screen TV. Shoppers trampled in race for a $49 tablet. That's not an aspirin, that's the, tablet. Salvation Army kettle stolen. How low can they go? Woman pulls stun gun in argument over Walmart shopping cart. One such story seemed isolated, even bizarre, in the era of flash mobs and a growing entitlement mentality fueled by politicians and income inequality alarmists. These far too frequent instances now seem to be symptomatic of a decaying culture. Like those with symptoms of illness who refuse to see a doctor, ignoring this pestilence that is destroying our foundations ensures it will get worse. These incidents are the result of a nation that has ceased to impose, yes, impose, the old values that served previous generations well. The dark night is rising, and it's not a Batman movie. The latest, but probably not the last expression of what I mean, is what used to be called assault and battery, but is now labeled the knockout game, in which mostly young men see if they can randomly knock another person unconscious with a single punch. People and nations must be ruled by something, as I said. What are we being ruled by? Our lower nature. The writer of Ecclesiastes said, "Whoever loves money never has money enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with his income." Who today is satisfied with their income and circumstances? In my neighborhood, there are a number of old homes built during World War II, and at the time, most of them sold for well under $20,000. One of these houses on the street behind us is currently on sale for more than $1 million. Far larger and more expensive homes stand on lots where smaller and cheaper homes once stood. These new homes are called tear-down houses. How many regard these larger houses as stepping stones to an even bigger next house? What is the purpose other than ego fulfillment? The estate sale is the end of it all. If things alone satisfied, wouldn't Americans be the most satisfied people on earth? We have more stuff than any generation before ours. The overflow we deposit in rented public storage units. The stock market is up substantially, but we want it to go higher with no bursting bubble this time. Then what? What will we do with more? Will tomorrow's more satisfy when today's more hasn't? Previous generations had less, and yet seem to have more of what matters. More character, more virtue, more contentment. All of it reinforced by parents, clergy, and for the most part, culture. In our day, materialism has become a false god we worship in the vain hope it will bring peace. In our conspicuous consumption, we are self-immolating, and the fuel is materialism. A writer named Jess Scott has said, "If money's the god people worship, I'd rather go worship the devil instead." Given the behavior of so many on Black Friday and other examples of cultural decay and national decline, many of us seem to be doing just that. Israel's King David warned long ago, "The wicked freely strut about when what is vile is honored among men." Psalm 12:8. We can't say we haven't been warned. Well now, after that inspiring and uplifting opening. Let me also say that everything is right on schedule. God is in control of all things. He is not surprised by anything. And I was thinking of the lyric of one of these songs they played tonight. I know it so well, a very famous song. God sent his son, they called him Jesus. He came to love, heal, and forgive. He gave his life to buy my pardon, and life is worth the living just because he lives. And because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. And I know he holds my future, and life is worth the living just because he lives. This is the great message of Christmas and Easter. It is the message that God sends to all of us. Now, there are people who think in Washington that government is God. Now, I have a solution to this. You know, the scriptures say that the tithe is 10% that God expects, a minimum, and government requires far more than that in our taxes. So under the First Amendment and the separation of church and state we're always hearing about, I would say that government now considers itself God, which is a violation of the First Amendment, and we shouldn't have to pay taxes to it anymore. Huh? Now, I don't know if you ever watched John Stossel's marvelous show on Fox on Saturday night. He had another one last night. But John's a libertarian, and his main thing is that why would you put more and more faith in government when government has proved repeatedly that it is incapable and incompetent of doing most of what it does? We can't even win wars anymore. We can't deliver the mail at a reasonable price and on time. Sorry to offend any postal workers here, but you know. What does government do well better than the private sector and individual initiative? What? Spend, yes. That it does well. Right, thank you. We have a Baptist here crying out in the middle of crying out in the middle of a talk. That's very good. Amen. But it's true. All they do is spend. The government is now our keeper. We shall not want. Yea, though we walk through the valley of the shadow of poverty, the Health and Human Services Department is there comforting us with food stamps and AFDC payments. And now they tell us, after all of the expense, after all of the borrowing, after all of the spending, after a record debt with no end in sight, we're going to be able to take over 1/6 of the American economy and give you the kind of health care you deserve. Right. Of course I'll respect you in the morning. I'm from the government. I'm here to help. The check is in the mail. The microphone's not on. The gun isn't loaded. And add that to all of the other lies. Why would we believe that? It's because an entire generation has now been reared in our government schools, another reason not to put them there, but that's for another talk, on the notion that people are entitled to other people's money. The unholy trinity of the secular left is greed, entitlement, and I forgot the third one. Greed and envy. Greed, envy, and entitlement. Those three. Not hard work. The attitude today is that if you make $2 and I make $1, you owe me 50 cents to make it fair. Now, when I was a young reporter, I interviewed a lot of wealthy and successful people. I never envied them. I asked them, where did you go to college? Where did you study? What is your life philosophy? What are the principles by which you live? Because someday I might want to be like you. But we don't teach that and model it anymore. Even the President of the United States is constantly railing against millionaires and billionaires as if they're evil and somehow acquired their wealth illegally or immorally. And yet it's the millionaires and billionaires in America and the thousandaires below them who would like to be millionaires and billionaires, who've started businesses, who built corporations, who hire people, who work and who pay taxes, and who support ministries for those who are believers. Now, we have totally flipped on everything. When I was growing up, we penalized and discouraged the things we said we wanted less of and subsidized and encouraged the things we said we wanted more of. Now, it's the reverse. We penalize and discourage the things we say we want more of and subsidize and encourage the things we say we want less of and are shocked to find we get more of what we want less of and less of what we want more of. Wow, that was tough. But isn't it true? Isn't it true? All those values and virtues that those of us of a certain age were handed down by our parents and grandparents who survived world wars and a Great Depression are now somehow regarded as passé. And instead, we're focusing on tweeting and twerking. And our role models are no longer men and women of virtue and character, but Miley Cyrus, Lady Gaga, and Madonna. What has happened to us? Sometimes prosperity is not so good. C.S. Lewis said that prosperity knits a man to this world. He thinks he's finding his place in the world, but all the while the world is finding its place in him. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, contented worldliness is the great enemy of the church. It's true. Back in the 1930s, Cole Porter wrote a song that could be an editorial of our time. He meant it as a satire then, but listen. In olden days, a glimpse of stocking was looked on as something shocking. Now heaven knows anything goes. Good authors who once knew better words now only use four-letter words writing prose. Anything goes. The world has gone mad today, and day's night today, and black's white today. And the next line is, and those guys today, the women prized today, are just silly gigolos. But isn't it true? Didn't the prophet Isaiah warn, woe to those who call good evil and evil good? Isn't that what is happening in our society? We have aborted 50 million babies made in the image of God. We are parading same-sex marriage in the streets and demand that culture accept it as normal. LBGT or LGBT, I get the letters mixed up sometime. That's the new thing. And if you're against it, you're a homophobe, you're a bigot, and all of the rest. What has happened to us? Where are we going as a nation? Where are we going as a people? There have been other times in which America has been challenged. Probably none that has divided us more war than the war between the states. In 1863, when it was in doubt whether the Union would be preserved, President Lincoln had done virtually everything he could to try to hold together a nation divided. And in the middle of that horrible, horrible war, the Congress of the United States, clearly under different management, requested that the president issue a proclamation for a day of humiliation, fasting, and prayer. Now imagine any president doing that today. Lawsuits would be filed. But this is what he said. He wrote it himself. He didn't have a speechwriter, no focus groups, no polls taken. That's what he wrote. And I think it echoes down through the corridors of time to our day and provides an avenue of restoration. It is the duty, now there's a word that's fallen out of favor. It is the duty of nations as well as of men, a duty of nations as well as of men, to owe their dependence upon the overruling power of God, and to confess this truth announced in the Holy Scriptures and proven by all history, that those nations only are blessed whose God is the Lord. We have been preserved these many years in peace and prosperity. We have grown in numbers, wealth, and power as no other nation has ever grown. But we have forgotten God. We have forgotten the hand that graciously preserved us. And we have vainly imagined in the deceitfulness of our hearts that all of these blessings were produced by some superior wisdom of our own. Intoxicated with unbroken success, we have become too self-sufficient to feel the need of redeeming grace, too proud to pray to the God who made us. It behooves us then, he said, to humble ourselves before the offended power and to pray for national clemency and forgiveness. Does that work? Take you back a few years before that. In 1857, before the war broke out, two men who worked on Wall Street in New York decided that the state of the nation was so bad and likely to get worse that they met together once a week on their lunch hour to pray for revival in America. Soon, they decided they would meet every day, and they were joined by a few other people on Wall Street in New York City. The group then got so large that the little room they were meeting in couldn't contain them, and they decided to start meeting in the churches at night and invite their wives. And they came to pray for revival in America. No organization, no direct mail, certainly no radio or television, no single leader, just prayer, humiliation, fasting. It wasn't long before the revival came. It exploded, racing up the Mohawk and down the Hudson. J. Edwin Orr has written about it in a great book called The History of Revivals in America. You can still get a copy. In the middle of the revival, 10,000 people a week came to Christ in New York City alone. It went down the Appalachian Mountains, and Orr says people were being baptized in the middle of winter, and he's in holes cut in the ice, the water, saying that when Baptists do that, you know they're on fire. The revival jumped the Atlantic to the United Kingdom. There was a slowdown in the mines in Wales. Somebody asked, well, how could there be a work slowdown in the middle of a revival? And they said, well, the miners, so many miners were converted, they stopped using bad language and the horses couldn't understand what was being said to them. In London, crime almost disappeared. The police had nothing to do, so they formed quartets and went to the revival meetings to sing. The results were astounding. A young man in Chicago wanted to teach Sunday school in his church and was told, we have too many teachers. But if you really want to teach a class, get a bunch of boys off the street, take them out into the woods, teach them discipline, and then come back and they'll be your class. The name of that young man was Dwight L. Moody, and that was the beginning of a great ministry that lasted 50 years and still reverberates today. What I have learned in my years of being a follower of Jesus of Nazareth is that God does things the opposite of man. Where we're talking about politics and the White House and the president and missiles and military strength and economic power, he's talking about being a servant, washing feet. He who would be a leader must be a servant of all. The widow's mite, the mustard seed, the last place at the table, the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. Humble yourself under the mighty hand of God, and he will exalt you in due time if you faint not. Those who wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They should walk and not faint. The still small voice, not the bellowing of a political leader we can't get away from 24/7. Ugh. So when are we going to get this message? If we want God's power, we have to do things God's way in every instance. Now, I don't know. I looked up in a concordance. America's not there. We've lasted longer than any other constitutional republic in history. But we are destroying ourselves more than the Taliban, more than the Soviets ever could or dream about, more than the Nazis, more than China. Great nations fail from within before they are conquered from without. Whether it was the Roman Empire, you name it. It's all the same. The invading armies are merely the final verdict on a nation that has already collapsed. We are sowing the wind, ladies and gentlemen, and we are about to reap the whirlwind. People say, well, God bless America. And I say, why should he? What are we doing to earn his favor? Killing his babies? Doing things that he calls an abomination? Solzhenitsyn said that the reason the Soviets were dominated Russia for 7 decades was that they had forgotten God. Moses warned what would happen if that occurred. Jesus warned what would happen if that occurred. Paul warned what would happen if that occurred. Oh, we have lots of churches. That doesn't mean anything. Who do we have in our hearts? That's what matters. Our educational system, our government educational system, is a wreck. There was a new survey taken recently that showed virtually every other nation that is doing well is in Asia. Amazing. Why is that? I'll tell you in a moment. Showing barely any change in 9 years, American 15-year-olds scored below their international peers in math, reading, and science. Among 24 developed countries, the United States ranked 26th. That's 34 developed countries. The United States ranked 26th in math, 21st in science, and 12th in reading. You know what the top countries were? Singapore, Hong Kong, Taipei, Shanghai, South Korea, Macau, and Japan, all Asian nations that have a work ethic and that respect elders and family. We used to be those things. What did we get away from? We got away from those things. We got away from God. Now, what does the future hold? I don't know. But I do know there are certain principles, certain boundaries, that if we live within them, we are going to have a better life in this life. You know this about investments. No, I mean, you invest wisely. You don't let your stomach get bigger than your eyes, as my mother used to say. You live within your means. You don't buy the big fancy sports car if you can't afford it. You don't buy the big luxury house if you can't afford it. Paul said to be content in whatever state you're in. We now envy the successful, and we subsidize the unsuccessful, and are shocked to find that we're getting more of the unsuccessful. 48 million Americans now receive food stamps. That is a disgrace, in my view. Nearly half the country now, 49%, soon to be over 50, get a government check of some kind. The secular left is very smart. They know human nature too. They know a lot of people would rather get a check than earn a check. But there comes a point when the boundaries will have been exceeded that there will be a breaking point in this country. There'll either be a revolution or a collapse. I'm hoping for the revolution if it's led by the right people. If you tolerate anything, you'll tolerate everything. And that's what we're about today, to being tolerant. People say to me once, well, you know, Thomas, you're so intolerant. I say, you think I'm intolerant? Wait till you meet God. You're going to want me back. All right, it's Christmas time, and I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts here. One of my favorite little songs, written for a musical many years ago. I don't even remember the name of the musical now. It was a Christmas musical. Christmas isn't Christmas till it happens in your heart. Somewhere deep inside you is where Christmas really starts. So give your heart to Jesus. You'll discover when you do that it's Christmas, really Christmas, for you. Nice, isn't it? I have some books out back. They're great for, Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, Church of Your Choice giving, or sign them for you. I have a mailing list called Values for Media. Tell you all about it. We do an annual media dinner in Washington where half the people are pagans and in the media, as you might expect, and we bring in some people who from our profession that share the gospel with them. So if you're interested in that, tell you more about it. But don't despair, because the last chapter is about to come true. And my favorite verse as we approach the end in our one-year Bible that my wife and I read every night before we go to bed is that when Jesus returns on that magnificent steed, he has a name known only to himself, but on the sash that he wears is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Even so, Lord Jesus, come soon and redeem your people. Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night.